Welcome. This is National Center for Appropriate Technology event. We're working with farmer cooperatives around the southeast of the United States. And one of our cooperatives by the name of Winston County Self-Help Association asked us to do a soil health. And we, let me mute everybody. Give me 1 second. All right. Great. All right. Sorry, everybody. It's just a lot of background noise. And that was some of our housekeeping that I wanted to share. Because this is one of our programs working with our farmer cooperatives, we do record. So if you don't want your face on or, asking questions verbally, you definitely can put them in the chat throughout the presentation. What we do is these videos end up on the ATTRA YouTube channel. And so we want to, make sure that we don't have a lot of background noises and so forth and a lot of movement in our background. It gives our IT people a lot of work to have to edit all of that out. And so I would ask if we can, right now, I have you muted and you cannot unmute yourself. But when it's time for a Q&A, I will allow you to unmute yourself. You could come on, ask questions, or drop it in the chat. So wanted to share that with you right quick, and we will get started. So this evening, as I have shared, this is a National Center for Appropriate Technology Gulf States Regional Office event, along with one of our hosts, farmer cooperatives that we work with in the state of Mississippi by the name of Winston County Self-Help Association, as well as another cooperative, the Mississippi Minority Farmers Alliance. And so we are always very grateful to assist them in them learning to get these different attributes of farming. They know how to farm because Winston County Self-Help have farmers in their 90s. And so they know how to farm, but the new way of farming, or to make it less strenuous on the body, that's what NCAT is here to do. And so we're here with Jody Reyer, Reyer Farms. He's another one of our clients and a friend, and we're so very grateful to him to always share the benefits of doing grass-fed, as well as being a heritage breed animal. A lot of people think that we cannot continue to raise those type of animals and be profitable. And Jody is one of many around the country that always said no to that. And so Jody, I'm gonna pass it over to you to get started.
All right. Thank you, Felicia. Do we know how to make that screen share happen?
I just gave it to you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna do that while I do kind of the little intro. The deal that what we're doing is we are a family farm, and everything, I have to click every one of these pictures, excuse me. Everything that we do is geared around the next generation. So our goals, our plans, every step that we make, it has to be a long-term step. It has to be something that we are looking ahead. Now, because farming is changing so rapidly, and the technology, the equipment, it's a lot to just keep up with. And what we try to do is use all of that to our best ability without leaving something out or creating a hole. I'm a firm believer that closed loop systems are very effective. So we're talking about soil health tonight, and I'm almost done. Okay, since I'm in the dark, that's really what I look like. This is my family plus one. We have a new baby. His name is Sonny. So this is us. This is every day what we're doing. And my goal when we started the farm, my wife and I, was to have something that was bigger than us. So to have the opportunity to share with y'all tonight is something that I enjoy doing, because I want everybody to win. If you want to be in agriculture, I want you to be successful. I want you to have all your dreams come true, and I want you to work hard and see the benefits of that. And if I can help, that's what I want to do. Knowledge that we share becomes a tool. Knowledge that we withhold becomes a weapon. And there's enough room out there, and there's enough work for all of us to do. So that's what this is about, is that rising tide that lifts all ships. So let's get to it. We raise one breed of cattle. We raise the Piney Woods cattle. This is one of our pastures. This is just a group of mama cows. Where we started and everything that happened, we knocked down a lot of briars. We had to adjust and make a lot of things that there was no information that really fit what we were trying to do. There's a lot of good information out there. There is, but you have to weed through it and figure out what applies to you. If you've got a notepad, I would like to share something that is a book that I have thoroughly enjoyed. I bought it for $1 at the library. The name of the book is Beef Production in the South. It's by a gentleman named Stuart Fowler. And some of the information that you share tonight will be information that I gleaned from this book. But I wanted to share that book because I get a lot of questions during the week, during the month, during the year. And I try to refer this book because it is very specific to our challenges and what we're doing here in the Southeast with cattle production. Now, it's not specific to just cattle production. There's principles that can apply to all manner of livestock. So we got the cows, we have our livestock, we have our land. What are we going to talk about? We know that we're supposed to be doing all these things. Rotational grazing will minimize our pest parasite loads. It's going to increase our stocking capacity. It's going to help with water conservation. It allow you to have a higher density forage sward. All these things are great, but we miss one critical point has been discounted, and I think it's really been browbeat to death. And so people feel like, this is a touchy subject. There are guys that have made their whole careers on discounting this subject. I'm in the camp of, we live here right now. We have a set of circumstances. We have to start where we are, and we need to use every available tool that we can to the best of our ability. And I feel like a lot of times that farmers feel guilty for going one way or the other because of what these other people are doing. And I'm not here to throw a rock. I'm really here to encourage, but there are no magic bullets, y'all. People say, oh, if you do one thing, rotate your cattle once a day. Yeah, okay, that's positive, but it's still not a magic bullet. There are still circumstances when it doesn't work, does not matter, doesn't work in all cases. Sometimes we're going to have the links to our cattle health, our efficiency, and our soil health. I came about this kind of naturally because there was a problem that presented itself. Most of what we're doing is we're trying to produce beef for a customer. So these are steers that are finishing, and I was having a very difficult time with green forages getting the quality of finish that I wanted for an animal. And the gravitational pull, the paradigm shift, whatever you want to say, I found a tool that helped me. And this is that taboo thing. This is hay. Hay, Get the Hay Out is a book. Jim Garris is a great guy. He has a lot of good things. But hay is not the evil that we all face, y'all. Hay can be a great tool. And that's what I want to talk about, is hay, utilizing it as a tool for our soil health and our herd health. Hay helps us with three things predominantly that are major impacts on our pastures. You have your seed bed, pressure, and water. Your seed bed encompassing fertility, the seeds that you're planting, exactly what are we growing? Do we have a good, dynamic, thriving soil that will make a proper seedbed, that we're going to get good germination, that we're going to get the quality of forage that we're wanting? The second thing is pressure. Now you have pressure from grazing, which is probably the biggest problem that most farmers deal with, especially with livestock, when they're trying to do rotational grazing, is how much pressure to put on the land, how much stocking density, how many cows can I put to the acre? That is the $1 million question that has such a very intricate answer if it needs to be correct. But there's also weed pressure. So both of these two pressures applied to our soils will affect our forage quality, ultimately how our animals perform because of that forage quality. It's going to affect the available amount of forage, so the quantity of it, which then ultimately affects how our livestock perform. But it can be a compounding or ascending or a growing, or it can go right back to a diminishing, depending on how we apply that pressure. And thirdly, water. Having water present is the Achilles heel, y'all. You know, as farmers, we're never happy. We're getting too much rain. We're not getting enough rain. Water is probably the biggest thing that we complain about in agriculture. And there are parts of the country and the world where water is, everything depends on water. Here in Mississippi in the South, we are very blessed that we have a very tolerable water situation, and I'm very grateful for that. But still, we have to manage that. If we mismanage it, if we take it for granted, it's going to be something that is very likely to bite us in the butt. Now, in this picture, there's a truck, there's a trailer, and there's hay. And then there's the ground it sits on and the sky above it. And I usually use this analogy, and the tractor's there loading it. These are things that we like as farmers. We can convince ourselves that we don't, but deep down, they appeal to us. The truck, the trailer, the hay, and the tractor that loaded it are not assets. They are consumables. Anything that depreciates is not an asset. The only asset that we have in this picture is the land. The land is the only thing that is appreciating. But just because they're consumables, just because they depreciate, does not mean that they're not tools that we can use to appreciate the land, that we can use to add value. These are things that are supposed to make our jobs easier. They're supposed to provide benefits, and they're supposed to add value to things that are appreciating. But I never, in no time tonight, do I want us to think that Jody is saying that these things are assets. They're not. They do not appreciate. They're not an investment is the proper word. I'm sorry. They're not an investment. This is my goal. This is what I want. This is a consistent product. Consistency leads to uniformity, but uniformity does not in itself become good. Uniformity can be negative. So what we have to do is be sure that we're doing the right things consistently, that we're getting uniformity that is positive. And at that point, we should become sustainable. Sustainability should always lead to profitability. If you cannot duplicate those results, you're not sustainable. So ultimately, you're not profitable. If you can do those results over and over and over and over, you have become sustainable. Establishing markets is your next thing. And then there's our profitability, which follows closely. So I know at some point somebody said, this guy's going to talk to me about hay, and they called bull. I don't know if you can see it, but this is Andy. He's one of my bulls, and this look on his face, this is the kind of look that I get, this kind of side eye look. But hay is what made Andy stand on the pastures where he is. Hay is the tool that I used. I don't know if anybody has priced the fertilizer cost, and it doesn't matter what fertilizer you're using, it's high. But hay allows me to reallocate fertility, improve my seed bed, do all these positive things. So I think it's worth focusing on. That's where we're going. But everybody's saying, oh, but I've got good grass. This is one of my favorite cows and her little steer calf, and they're just enjoying life in the sunshine. Everything was good. This was last summer, and they were having a good time. Same calf. This day's not so good for him. And he looked at me, and I swear he told me, he says, hey, you got any of that hay? I'd really like some of that hay. He said, all that green lush grass, it's gone. We're in a tropical area, y'all. We have the ability to have a long grazing season, but at some point we are going to run out of our our perennial grass. So your options are annuals, which ryegrass is a great one. But ryegrass is very labor and cost dependent if you want a success. Today, I was talking with a guy. They spent a pile of money. We're going to see the pastures that they spent a pile of money on. They still cannot graze their cattle on that ryegrass, and they're probably not going to be able to graze the cattle on that ryegrass till probably the middle of March. It's not ready. It's not going. Here's the thing about when you start grazing ryegrass in the middle of March. Middle of April, that ryegrass is starting to go away. You spend all that money to have really good 30 days of grazing. That's not very cost effective. Not to mention, it's a pretty good gamble. With 4 kids and a very tight budget, I need to have a little bit of security. Hay is cheap insurance. Now, this is what that ground looked like for me. This is the major drawback of hay, is we're doing a lot of damage to the soil. We're doing a tremendous amount of labor. But if I address that open and honest when I start, that I have these issues, and then I start to mitigate those problems and make adjustments, I can be very successful. I don't know what that dinging is. Is it me or y'all? All right, focus. That was very apropos. All right, this is the same, the black cow for the picture that had the little calf. This is her calf this year, standing in what it looks like very short grass, and it is very short grass. This calf is very young, but I want you to look right to her right. You see that little black dot? This is the $1 million question with livestock and fertility, is how to make that little black dot pay for me. That black dot is what I currently refer to as a political promise, but it has a lot of promise. That little bit of cow manure, if managed correctly and utilized, becomes a wealth of fertility that we can then appreciate that land. Now, how to make that manure more is something that you can strain your budget. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble, but the manure tells you a whole lot of what's going on. So this is in early March. We've got calves hitting the ground, and everywhere that I've put in the white line is where I'd fed hay all winter. Now, there are no muddy spots. There are no bare spots. There are no clumps. It is a very uniform seed bed. The grass is short. There's not a tremendous amount of thatch that's going to inhibit my seed sod from coming through. Now, if I'd gone and done this in annual ryegrass, March, I would have grazing out there for those cattle. They would have green grass growing, but that thatch, my perennial grass would have to overcome that thatch to come through and then make me a sward of grass for the summer. So using hay as a tool, I was able to take that hay, apply it to there, feed those cattle, in turn, let the hay appreciate the land. Now, how I do that depends on where I'm at. This particular picture right here, same general principle, but a different application. This pasture here was an established pine plantation that a tornado damaged. The trees that you see are the only pine trees that survived that tornado. So 30-something acres was leveled. The calves that you saw in the previous picture, their mothers gestated on bulldozer tracks in this pine plantation. Now, this would be the following winter. You see that we have some green grass that's coming up. Most of that green grass is the results of hay that we fed the previous winter. So we took into consideration that we do not have a good residual seed bed of anything that's going to grow in the cool season. So we utilize some cooler season hays to put out there. Now, it wasn't a lot, but we got enough to get some ground cover. We got some roots established. We have a seed bed established. Those mama cows grazed it down. Those calves grazed it down. That's fine. That's what it was there for. Tweaking the application for where we are, using a different mix of the hay allowed us to change some things. Now, this is basically what we do. We take the roll of hay, we cut the net wrap off, which is very, very important. Net wrap or string, you do not want it in your pastures, y'all. What we make and what we do depends on the components of the cattle's stomach. The different folds and compartments will take that net wrap and create a dam where no nutrients can go through and they can't pass the net wrap. And what eventually will happen is you will kill your animal with net wrap and hay string, plastic bags, that kind of stuff. You don't want any of that in your pastures. So we cut that net wrap off, and then I start to unroll that hay. Unrolling that hay just enough for the duration that I want them to feed on that hay. And then I do not feed in that spot again. I will move over. These rolls were 4 feet wide. So I'm going to move over about 6 foot, and then I'm going to unroll another one. Well, as the cows, if you'll notice, they're eating on one side and their back end is facing another side. That back end on every one of the cows will drop all of their urine and all of their manure onto the ground. The bulls, their urine is going to come a little closer to the hay bale, but still I'm able to manage it. When I put the next roll of hay, while they're eating that roll of hay, their manure and their urine is following in the residual that was left from the last time I fed there. So I've utilized that hay to feed them what they didn't eat for whatever reason. Cattle are messy eaters. It was left there with fertility that was from the hay, and then it collects that manure and urine, and it's holding it. Back to that water scenario, this time of year, we're not worried about our nitrogen volatilizing because of the cold temperatures. But when we have it really wet, it pushes the nitrogen down below where the roots can absorb it. So the following spring, what you notice is your weeds will outcompete your good grass. And it's always going to be the weeds that have tap roots, because they're able to mine down there and get that nitrogen that was pushed down lower by our wet moisture. We have unique problems here in the South because right here, there's snow on the ground, but it's not enough snow to freeze the ground. So the nutrients can still go up and down with the freeze and thaw and the rain that comes inevitably every time we get snow. We don't have that hard thaw. But using the hay like this, I'm not making a bunch of mistakes. If you can notice, every cow gets to eat. That bull is bossy. That bull, he is the one that is going to be sure that he gets his belly full. Just behind him, there's a red cow. She will always get her belly full. Behind her, there's a black cow with a white on her butt. You just can't see her. She's the third in line. There is a pecking order. Now, this little girl up here on the left in the front, you see how she's gotten around the whole herd and eat? She is one of the most docile cows that I have. She's so timid, but you can see she is butterball fat. Nobody got her to push her away because she had enough for her and everybody else had enough for them. So by doing this, I've spread it out. Number two, my calves aren't around a hay ring, which is a big problem with hay. People say they don't want to waste hay, so they put out a hay ring. Well, what hay rings are a good place to muddy, concentrate all those nutrients. You burn the soil with too much fertility and nothing grows there for months and months. By doing this, we're spreading it out. This is essentially like taking a fertilizer spreader across that field. But just like you have to drive the equipment to spread a fertilizer applicator, you got to roll that hay and make it do what you want it to do. Same pasture after the hay. Now, we had no dead spots. We had no burn spots. We come back with good, dense grass. Keep it in mind, the uniformity of that grass. Now, there is some pressure there. There's grazing pressure and there's weed pressure. If you look right here in the beginning of the picture, there's going to be some dog fennel, or also called summer cypress. Over there in the left-hand border, there's going to be some milkweed, which nothing eats milkweed, but monarch butterflies love it. So you've got some weed pressure there. If you will notice, this dog fennel right here, the top has been nipped out. So something came and they ate a little bit of that dog fennel, but they're not going to eat it all. It's going to remain there. It is a weed that is of very little value, in my opinion, to my cattle. That's where I discern a weed from a forage. Your forages are grass, forbs, and lagoons. And then everybody puts weeds in that don't fit in those categories. Technically, they're all going to fit in some of those. Some of them are woody, blah, blah, blah. But if they're palatable to the cattle and the cattle eat them, they're not a weed in my book. So 1 year later, from when that picture was taken, we did the same thing over, fed the hay there. You notice there's not as much weed pressure from those summer cypress and those undesirable, unpalatable species. So what I did here is we had more grass in this one particular area than what I thought I was going to graze through. So I went in there and I cut it for hay. Not all of it. I looked at it, thought this is the amount of forage I need to get me to this target date, and then I went in there and cut it. Now, because this is a cycle, consistency, uniformity, so forth and so on, I'm still getting the same amount of grazing off of this ground, but now I got to cut the hay off of it. That's very, very important. I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth. When I cut hay off of this ground, I am removing fertility. I'm taking it with me. I rolled it up and I took it somewhere else. So that is fertility that left this ground. And it leaves it in these little rolls. But that fertility is now locked inside that hay. I've preserved it. It's nutrients, protein, all these good things that I need to keep my cattle operation going, wrapped up in this nice little pile. at the expense of removing fertility from that ground. Now, we're going to look at two different rolls of hay. These are what we call the mini bales. Backstory on this is I got started in these because I was desiring better hay for my stock. And I looked for the most economical way of doing that to give them what they needed in a way that would fit my schedule. This is what we came up with. So this is the creme de la creme of our hay operation, is these mini bales. So we cut that hay right here. It's about dollar bill length. It's leafy. It's not much stem. That is predominantly Bahia grass. Now, this idea in most of the hay that you see sold is much longer than this. The function of hay, in order for it to be good hay for nutrition, and it has to be something that the cattle, the goats, whatever livestock species is utilizing it, can actually utilize it. So my granddaddy used to say, whatever you gain on the top, you lose on the bottom. And what he was referring to is just because you let the grass grow taller and cut it for hay to get more hay doesn't mean that you got any better hay. Hay is one of those things where less is actually more. You don't want the stemmy long stuff, because the function that happens with livestock is they have to break that hay down. And they have to get that hay broke down to increase the surface area so their rumen, the microflora, the bacteria, and the fungi can feed on it. So when you cut that hay at the right stage, you're greatly assisting those livestock into being able to get that into a bite-sized portion, let's say, to where the bugs in the gut can now deal with it and then appreciate that hay, and your cattle get good nutrition. And I'll tell you, this is a Jody observation. The first indicator about feeding hay, if you want to know if it's good hay, is watch your livestock. If they salivate at hay, chances are it's at least pretty decent hay. That salivation function means that A, it is palatable. So it was probably cured correctly. It was probably cut correctly. That salivation that starts before they really start eating, they're using all of their senses. You have started your digestive process before they get it in their mouth. That is a super important thing to remember. That is something that I always look for when we're pulling hay out, is, did my cattle start to salivate? When I see that, I feel good about what we did. So we put it in these little rolls, and I've got this feed scoop on there because that's exactly what this is. This is nutrition. When you are managing your nutrition for your livestock, you are catching a residual benefit in improving your soil fertility. Managed nutrition of livestock creates a very amicable, hospitable, pleasant environment in their gut, which keeps their pH correct, which means that their urine and their manure that hits the ground is a very favorable pH to then benefit the fungi, the protozoa, the bacteria, and this whole living colony that makes up our soil. So the better that you're managing your livestock nutrition, the better your fertility is in your soil. So even though using sorry hay or so-so hay will have benefits, they will never have the benefits of a really good hay. So utilizing the best hay that you can get will increase your feed efficiency, your feed conversion, therefore also helping your efficiency and your conversion in your soil. Nitrogen is what we need in our soil, gives our grasses that green tint. but when an animal ingests it, it's in the form of protein. So everything that has a nutrient value for an animal has a fertility value for our soil. That same field that I budgeted how much grass I needed, this is it. You see the cow, and she's one of 48 that were on this field. She is thrifty. She's in good body condition. She is currently gestating her baby in this picture. We have a thriving field that was able to continue to grow, and then we managed that herd, and those cattle grazed on that field until the 1st of January. I really did not start feeding them hay on a daily basis till January. We had a great year this year, y'all, with forages. It was a great year to manage. It was a great year to improve pastures. So this is what happened here. So you see the cattle grazing the taller grass, but they're grazing it in a uniform manner. It's all good to them. It's all pleasant. They're not sifting. There's not a lot of undesirable species in there. Same field, same time, but this is where we cut hay. 2 different cows. There again, where I cut the hay is there very uniform. It's just shorter. So that uniformity is giving all of my desirable species an opportunity to compete with the less desirable species. When you allow cattle to pick and choose, and cattle pick and choose even when you're doing intensive grazing, you're just hoping that they trample the species that they don't eat. They're still there. They still did not utilize them. With this, the hay mower utilized every species that went into a roll of hay, and then the cattle ate them. One picture back, they're utilizing every species, and they're eating them, and they're still grazing them. And they grazed on this field for roughly another month. So now I took fertility off of that field. I don't want to, there is no free lunch. For what we get, it costs us something. But in this picture, this is a field of brown top millet that, if you look in the background, you'll see chicken houses. This farmer planted brown top millet for a dove field, and he utilized his chicken litter for fertility to grow this dove field. But in order to attract doves, the seeds need to be on the ground, and they need to be where the little dove can eat them. So he called me. He says, would you mind coming over here and baling this field so we can dove hunt? And I was more than happy to go over there and do that, because each one of those bales weighs 50 pounds. So this is a quarter of the field. Every red dot is a hay bale, and it took me a considerable amount of time to go through there and tick mark them off. This was the first cutting, so it had all the fertility that he applied to the brown top millet. And then I hauled it off in 50-pound bales, which is way more than what I hauled off of the field that I cut. So now I'm taking this fertility and I'm bringing it to my farm. This is a big thing about hay. I'm not advocating getting in the hay business, but view your hay expense as fertility that you're buying and bringing to your farm, on top of the nutrition that you're feeding your cattle. So this was just a really good win for us, and it allowed me to recoup that fertility. And I am considerably happy about it. These were my little hay helpers that day, and we loaded up all that hay and we stored it in the barn real nice until we ran out of space. Another issue with hay, but don't worry, we had a plan. The last day we cut it wet, and then we ensiled it. So when I ensile it, I'm really keeping all that fertility, because there was no volatilization of nitrogen or protein from the sun. taking it off. There was no heat, no water was lost. So we took it at high moisture hay and ensiled it. Now, when you ensile it, what you're doing is fermenting that hay. Hay is nutrition. Ensiled hay is fermented, which is almost like it's pre-digested, which means that the animal has to work less to get the good out of it, which therefore increases the efficiency of the feed conversion and so forth, which then increases my fertility. Garbage in, garbage out. Good stuff in, good stuff out. So there's that fertility. If you can look right here, there's a patch of hay inside all that green lush grass. And this green lush grass was, I don't know, I think a bag of busted ryegrass and some other stuff that I got from the co-op that at a discount. And we went out there with the four-wheeler, and my wife drove me around, and I spread it off the back of the four-wheeler after we had fed hay. Now, this one particular spot was where a core of a hay bale was, so it did not create a good seed bed. This is what you get when you feed in rings. This is what you get when you feed the whole roll. Now, all around that, you see how lush and green it is around that core. That's because all the heads were at the core and all the butts were around the circle. The fertility that you capture, the fertility that you're able to save is what you're looking for. Now, when you manage it in an unrolled manner, or if you want to feed the whole bale, you need to feed it as a grazing pattern, like a checkerboard. And that way, these cores right here, there would have been a bale all around it. And as some cows were eating on this bale, other cows are eating on another bale. So you got heads and butts going different directions. You're not going to have this core problem. But you feed a singular bale, you're always going to get this. So this is my seed bed. There's my fertility. Our plan's working so far. Now, in this particular field, I actually grazed the cattle on this ryegrass. And then after they grazed it one time, I pulled them off. I let the ryegrass recoup, and then I harvested. So I got double use of this. And this particular little field, which is only a couple acres, has now become our little pet trial field for different hay things. And I'm really excited. Maybe we'll share something about that at another time. So pressure. I saw somebody had a question about pressure. You've got grazing pressure, which is the stocking density, the stocking ratio, the carrying capacity, and then you have weeds. These are all things that are not only pulling on our desirable forages, but they're also pulling from our soil. So when you're feeding a weed that the animals are not using, the weed is of no value to you until you get rid of it. And a good way to do that is to mow it. But mowing gets pretty expensive. So one thing you can do in a scenario like this field is ironically the same field that we cut hay that we've looked at several times. This was a few years ago. We utilized the hay where we had concentrations of those weeds, and we would unroll the hay beside the weeds. Same thing that we did if we were going to really intensify the grazing right there, doing the same thing with hay. They're going to come to the hay and they're going to stomp out that summer cypress. So by doing this repetitively, we get rid of the summer cypress and we make it more sporadic. And eventually what we did is I went through there and just got rid of what was left. And we eventually we didn't want to keep putting hay on this field. We thought we were good. So I started working on another pasture and I just mowed that field. Well, the mowing creates the same effect as grazing. So the grazing pressure, you can have grazing pressure whether it's green growing grass or if it's hay. If you keep feeding the hay in the same spot, you're going to get foot traffic. You're going to get a lot of pressure that's going to compact your soil. It's going to hammer it. It's going to be very adverse for your situation. Now, this particular field right here is one that we had some lower quality hay, and we used it to stimulate that field. So there is a lot of diversity of forages in that field because it was hay from all over. Now, if you'll notice the cow that is on the left-hand side, that is the same calf from the previous picture. She's a few months older. Now she is thriving, coming into her own. She's at this point where her tank is ready to handle a lot of forage. So by using the lower quality hay, we added a lot of fertility and a lot of diverse species. Some of these species are not very high energy. They're more roughage type species, which is fine. You're using that on a class of animal that enables them to take that in because they're at a rapid growth stage. They're like teenagers. They eat a whole lot. So you're stretching that stomach. You're letting them eat all that good stuff, the not so good stuff, and they balance it out. The end result is the following year you come back, you have a better field. You took the hay, you managed the soil, you got more forage, then you manage the forage, so therefore you increase the pasture. It's a closed loop. The field here, we're unrolling hay, we're spreading everything out, but notice you see the sporadic weed pressure. That weed was allowed to go all the way to seed. So at this point, I've got to contend with that weed next year. I'm going to have to contend with that weed pressure. So we're going to tighten up how we manage this. We're probably going to mow this field next year and hope that we get a more pleasant looking field where every species in there is desirable. But for the time being, we're utilizing the hay and the foot traffic, and we're going to see how that works. Y'all, to say that anybody has all the answers is just not so. This is a revolving door experiment. You try, you learn. Don't be scared to make some mistakes. Now, we've talked about the seed bed and the fertility. We've talked about the pressure, this water. One of our biggest struggles with water is not having too little, and it's really not having too much to the point that we're flooding a good bit, but we do have a lot of water in our forage. It makes our forage very washy. All cattle nutrition is based off of dry matter. So to get down to cattle nutrition, you have to remove the water. So with our green growing grass, you have compromised the amount of dry matter nutrition they can get in because their tank is full of water. Secondly, in the wintertime, this time of the year, we tend to have a lot of mud. This area right here is what we call a heavy use pad. It has a lot of traffic. That is the mineral trough. I feed minerals in an open trough and I check them daily. I want the cattle to have fresh minerals, but they're constantly coming in there, getting minerals, getting salt. The water troughs are just to the left. There's a lot of foot traffic here. I can't afford to put concrete. I can't afford slag or something to do this large of an area. But what I can do is select a manageable area that I'm not creating an adverse effect for my soil. In this area right here, you're going to have runoff when you don't have a cover on that ground. Well, what we've done here is selected a site to where we minimize runoff. I do not want to have an erosion problem. And even though I have bare soil, which is not ideal, but it is not something that you can get away from. Livestock are going to travel the same path. You can be the best rotational grazer, but over the course of time, you're going to develop cow paths because cattle are creatures of habit. So what you've got to do is figure out a way to manage that water from an erosion standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, picking a good selection site for heavy use pads to where the water is complement. In this case right here, this site is a little bit higher, so any runoff is then caught on all sides by grass. And so I'm not losing soil. So the fertility that goes through the water, it's actually going out there to my grass. We were able to do that. Some sites, you really have to search for a good way to manage water, rainfall. If you put a hay barn there, that roof just became a watershed. And so it's going to throw a lot of water. So always be thinking about how your water is draining and how that affects your soil. Now, one thing that we did in this area we didn't just go out there and say, this is where it's going to be. I fed hay here for 2 seasons to watch where the water did. There is a lot of stomped hay on that bare dirt. There's a lot of carbon. There's a lot of water holding capacity to where that area does not get super muddy. You can always stand up in that area. So that's one consideration of water. The second consideration of water is when you're feeding your hay, you want to look at the time that you're feeding on any one area, not just the duration that you feed there, but also the time of the season. Think about when you got to feed way in the back of your place, feed that early. Don't wait till the scenario is worsened and the mud gets worse. So water, we're always trying to manage it. We want to be very good stewards of the water that we're using and the water that we get from rainfall. And we have to understand that we have to have a way to get those cattle up and move those cattle. Years ago, I heard a guy talking about rotational grazing, and he touted that they were loading out pot trucks every week. And a pot truck is a 2-story cattle van that'll haul about 50-something thousand pounds of cattle. That's a lot of beef to move through an area. And he said, you don't have to have fancy facilities. Well, first of all, cattle don't climb very well. And I don't know how they were getting in that second story without a ramp. Second, I don't know how they were moving that many pounds of beef year round in a muddy condition. So they're always be looking for holes in the arguments and how that applies to you. I've come here, but I'm human. I make mistakes. If you find a hole in something I said, please let me know, because I don't ever want to quit learning. But how we manage our water is a big thing in our soil health. So with this, my idea, I have a heavy use pad where I want to concentrate my cattle traffic. If this gets too bad, the first thing we do is start putting hay out here, because that hay will hold those nutrients and slow down that water and prevent an erosion incident. This was a bare soil site. This was where the tornado came. We utilized hay to help hold that soil, brought in different species. So we had some cool season annual grass hays to reseed and hold that soil. This is the result just a few months after that picture was taken. We have a diverse sward of clovers, bahia grass, there's centipede, there's Bermuda grass, there's a host of different species in there. As you can see, the cattle are very thrifty, they're doing very well. The little bull that was in the picture, here's him now with his mother. You can see that he has grown considerably. She's still in a good body condition, but paying attention to the consistency of the grazing pressure, because we uniformly applied that fertility through that hay over and over and over in different places, working with the land. You can see it slopes. So what we did is we actually started on the tops of those slopes and rolled the hay downhill. And then when we got to the lower ends, we rolled it around in circles. The reason we started is those cattle like to be up on that higher ground. And most people will feed hay and rings and stuff on the high ground. And what they end up doing is losing a lot of topsoil. So we started on the high ground building dams of hay thatch that they didn't utilize to catch that. So we didn't lose a lot of soil, even though that was a lot of bare ground in that pasture. Now, this is the hayfield that we cut this year. And if you look, there's some horse nettle in there. There's some diversity. Not all of that is what you'd want real good, but the cattle did not sift this hay. They ate the horse nettle by the mouthful with the other grass. It was cut right. It was cured right. But uniformly managing that hayfield allowed me to take all that fertility elsewhere and apply it to different pastures. So you're always going to be looking at buying nutrition and fertility, and that the more uniform the hayfield, the more uniform your nutrition and the more uniform that your fertility is. Now, if you look in this picture, you got all these calves and they're leaving. Look at the uniformity in which this pasture was grazed. There's no undesirable species that can outcompete my desirable species. Is it grazed short? You bet. The reason it's grazed short is the protein's on the bottom. You see those little calves right there? They need a lot of protein. Now, ideally, when you graze short, you're opening up yourself to a parasite problem. That's a risk that I was willing to take. So there's always a risk and a reward for what you're doing. But these cattle were not denied anything. I wanted them to graze it short. This field had plenty of rest to come back to. If you'll notice the field over, this was the field that is probably three weeks behind that they had left. They're fixing to be rotated far to the right. So the next field on the other side of the fence is the same field that we've been coming to reoccurringly with the hay that's been unrolled and the hay that I cut off, so forth and so on. So you see that circle. I'm just trying to show you all the aspects through the calendar. Here's that same field. Now, this is picture was actually in the 1st of November, I believe. So we have all these cattle out there. We had plenty of rest. We got plenty of regrowth. The cattle are eating this field, which I considered my best grazing field, specifically in this time. The reason that I wanted this is because this was my best pasture. It had what was I considered the best fertility because of all the hay that we fed over here over the past 2 years. I wanted these cattle to graze this pasture when it was drier. You can see that the ground is considerably drier. That forage is considerably drier. I wanted a very high intake. These cattle right here are entering the latter end of their pregnancies. I wanted good development in gestation to those calves that they're carrying. This girl right here, she is still not calved. Her name is Red Hot Scent, but she should be calving any day. I wanted to give them the best shot. Best nutrition. It benefits your soil, but it benefits your cattle. but it has a compounding effect. Because of the decisions that I made over the past 2 years, will have a compounding effect on whatever calf Red Hot Scent drops. Her calf should outperform her. And when you have an animal that is a better performer, then it takes less of the forage for them to perform, which means therefore you compounded your profitability per acre, but you also compounded your conversion rate per unit, which means that hay cost per unit goes down, which means that your hay that you're applying can go to further more head. Well, the more head you got, the more stomachs that you got utilizing it, the more microflora, the more balanced a pH, the more fertility. I'm getting lost myself in this thing, but it's a compounding effect. One good decision leads to a lot more good decisions from that result. So 2 weeks ago, I moved the cattle from that good ground that we just saw Red Hot Scent. This picture was taken this week. Let me see if I can do this. If y'all can see my screen, you see the white cow, and then right under her mouth is a little brown spot. And that little brown spot is a brand new baby calf. And they're coming to this field that we purposely grazed very short. I don't want them chasing old grass right here. I want their nutrition to be solely based off of the hay, because now we're feeding them the best hay. You see the two cows back there grazing? They're grazing hay that has been unrolled on that field. Most of the cows are grazing the front part of the roll. They're grazing the very end of it. But there is no big pile. There is no big mess. What we're trying to do is manage how we applied that hay to those cattle. That way we're improving that soil. We don't want to apply too much pressure, too much fertility. We want to manage the water that we're getting, because we're probably fixing to get some more rainfall. Everything we're doing it to, number one, take care of the soil. And when those bacteria are happy, they create me forages that make my cattle happy, which therefore they're getting a more balanced diet, more balanced pH, which then returns to the soil, and we're back to that cycle. I need to unzoom. And at the end of the day, that is the result that we're looking for. Consistency leads to uniformity. Was the result that we got the uniform, positive result that we hoped for? If it was, keep doing it. If it's not, you need to change it up. But hay should not be looked at as the enemy. It is a cost. It is a tool, but it's something that can greatly benefit our soils. And if you dig, and a lot of the people that are telling you that hay is bad, at some point you'll find out that they utilized hay to establish where they are today. So my goal tonight was to encourage each and every one of you, wherever you are, use the tools that you have, use them wisely, and try to get that result that you're looking for. I really appreciate it. If y'all got any questions, let me know. Yeah. It's Beef Production in the South. It's a great read for anybody that's wanting to do cattle in the South.
All right, I'm gonna put it in the chat, Joe. You said Beef Production in the South?
Yes, ma'am. The author's name is Stuart Fowler.
S-T-U-A-R-T?
No, ma'am. S-T-E-W-A-R-T.
Okay. Fowler?
F-O-W-L-E-R. At the time, he was the director of research at Texas A&M. He was formerly the head of the Department of Animal Science at Mississippi State University and also a professor of animal science at Louisiana State. It's a really practical book, and that encompasses a lot of information.
Great. So I know you touched bases on this pressure question. Did you see it in its entirety, the full question, Jody?
I did not.
So it said, could you share how much pressure do you put on finishing a rolled out bale before more is offered?
I'm always calculating on a per head basis. So depending on the class of the animal that you're feeding, their requirement for their daily intake is going to be greater or lesser, so forth and so on. And let's just take mature cows and a bull of my breeding herd. Sorry, the light went out. I bank on them eating 12 pounds of hay a day, whether they eat it or not. So when I look at the roll, the roll is a known value of 1,000 pounds. So that 1,000 pounds, divide that by 12, and that's how many head that I can take out of that roll. And from there, say I only have 30 in a field, I'll give them about what they're going to take, and then I remove it. When I go back later that evening, I have the luxury of doing this chore morning and night. If they're still looking hungry, I'll give them some more. It's a lot easier to manage the little rolls. The bigger a roll is, the more guesswork, so forth and so on. The little rolls are 50 pounds. And when I'm using the 50 pounds, I'm usually doing that to developing animals because that is my best hay. They're considerably smaller than the grown cow, but their nutrition requirement is considerably greater. So for them, I'm figuring on them 10 pounds. So for every one bale, I want to feed 4 head. And that gives me 10 pounds that I can I've got a margin of error per se. So I only want to give them enough for a day, but I don't ever make them clean up. Cattle will clean up on their own. So if you feed one day and you fed them too much, don't sweat it. Go feed them again, just feed them less. And that was sitting there, if they didn't get enough that second day, they'll go clean up what you had yesterday. But I don't ever force them on Tuesday to clean up before I give them some more, if that makes sense. I don't know who asked it, but
yes. Hopefully that come on. Jody, do me another favor. I'm getting ready to unmute give people the option to unmute. So it's gonna do that mute all kind of stuff. And then I'm gonna ask you if you can, unmute yourself.
Okay.
All right. Allow. So mute themselves. Okay. All right.
All right.
There we go. Now, our next question is coming. Is it Frederic? And he was saying, I may be the only one not living in the South here. So here's my question. Does the transformation process of the hay is identical with longer winters? And is the ultimate sustainability of the whole business still achievable?
Yes, Frederic, you have a benefit in being far northern than we are, and a lot of times that your season is going to be a little bit more predictable, whereas we can have summer, winter, and fall all in the same day in different orders. Yours is going to kind of stay winter. So With yours, number one, your forage chain is going to preserve a little better, even though it's shorter. We may have grass longer, but it's of lower quality. Also, if you get snow and you keep snow, it insulates the forage below. So I'm drawing on past experience. February is a tough time when we grew strawberries. So to combat freezes, we would run sprinklers, and the sprinklers hit the strawberries and they freeze. So you have strawberry plants out there that are coated in ice, but the water that is contacting the strawberry is warmer than freezing. So the ice insulated it from the wind chill. And so same thing happens with your forage. It preserved it. It kept it above freezing below the ice. So in your case, when you're going and using hay, those cattle may go back to where you fed previously and dig through that snow and get some of that hay that they may have left. And the quality may be pretty much similar to what it was earlier. Secondly, your hay will be appreciated when you move them around to different pastures. I would probably move them faster where you are, because I would unroll my hay in an area, but I wouldn't stay there as long. I'd go somewhere else, because they can augment the hay with nutrition that's still viable underneath that snow. And so you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck. Whereas here, our forages, that when we move them, they've essentially rotted. And when you're doing hay and you've done it correctly, what you've done is preserve that hay. You're actually curing it. Standing hay, or what people call stockpile forages, are of lower quality than properly cured hay, because they're diminishing every day. Whereas hay, cured right, stored right, it does not lose quality for years. I mean, it's very solid. But in your case, you have an extra benefit from your snow. And also, when you move, talking about a sacrificial ground or a heavy use pad, I would try to keep them there until that ground froze. And then once the ground freezes, start feeding your hay and your pastures from a fertility standpoint, because you're not going to get the trampling of the mud because the ground's froze. And you're moving the cattle faster, feeding hay. And so you're going to accelerate your benefits, I think, much faster with that. And I know a lot of guys, excuse me, that are further north than that I have relationships with. One of them in Montana. I mean, he has phenomenal results from doing it that way. Did that answer your question? All right. I apologize about the lights, y'all.
No, you're good. Thank you, Jody. Any other questions? You can unmute yourself or place it in the chat. Any other questions? I know we've gone over, but this is an awesome time, and I'm just very glad that you all were able to stick with us to be able to hear, because this is well needed information. So sometimes we go over and so forth. So any other questions? You can put it in the chat. You can unmute yourself.
I love questions. Questions are better than me presenting.
Felicia, I have a question. Do you spray your past, and what you use to spray your past?
Spray with for weeds or fertility?
For weeds.
No, sir. I really don't. There are certain places where we may use a herbicide, because we had one spot where it was Kogan grass, and Kogan grass is not just a one spray. But anytime that I use a herbicide, I rely heavily on people that are far more experienced than me. One being my wife. That is what her whole background is integrated pest management. So I really cater towards very specific herbicides to target the weed that I need. I do not like broad spectrum stuff because, like I said earlier, if it's palatable, it has a nutrient value, so therefore it's a benefit. It's not a weed. So when I want to target Kogan grass, I'm going to use something that's very specific that's not going to have long-lasting effects or negative aspects. But if you're in a scenario like a hayfield where you have a very picky client, they may want herbicide used. So if it's for them, we resort back to a herbicide that will fix our problem and have the least residual impact. I know that wasn't very specific, but there's so many different herbicides that do different functions. So I would say first reach out to your extension service, or I know that ATTRA has some good resources for different chemicals and applications, but it's really not an easy thing to look at without being very specific.
Okay, my follow-up here, how often do you test your soil and do you have your hay test?
Last soil test we did was 6 years ago, and we don't test hay. I probably should, but the outsourcing of hay testing and the amount of information that I got back was not satisfactory for me. So I thought it was kind of a waste of my money. So we use our hay quality test first on ourselves before we sell it to anybody else. But if I'm getting animal performance and I'm seeing the results that I want, I'm happy. But I would really, 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 really like a good lab that would give me forage results that I want. And on soil test, I will want a cation exchange, not just an MP and K recommendation, and not that canned lime recommendation that really frustrates me. I want very more specific. I'm very numbers driven, and if I cannot get the numbers I want, I just don't fool with it. So I'm not, because I can't get the results I'm looking for.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry I wasn't much help with that one.
I mean, that's your opinion. That's how you run your operation, and you created success, so you keep to your formula.
Well, but I'm not against it in any way. Yeah. If anybody knows, and I'll put that out there, of a good soils lab that will give very specifics as far as the conversion rate and the available amount of nutrients, not just their levels, but what is actually available. I'm very interested in that. My default reset is always an observation of what's going on with nature. And so that's until I find a quantifiable lab that will give me information that's usable, I'm going to just use nature.
Thanks, Jody. And thank you, Mr. Frank, for the question. We have a question that said, do you use lime?
Yes. We utilize lime in several different things. First of all, we utilize lime in our nutrition program. So going back to balanced rumen, balanced soil, that lime is a critical function that they need to provide calcium, just like the soil. So all of our manure is adding lime. And then in addition to that, we've used several different varieties of lime. Domitic lime is probably my least favorite because it favors pigweed and a lot of other species that are just kind of undesirable or they're harder to deal with. So even though the cattle will eat pigweed, I try to keep my pigweed very minimal, and I'm using it basically as an indicator for armyworms because armyworms always hit pigweed first. But I don't really like dolomitic lime. I've used some of the sugarcane lime. It's okay. Probably more than anything, we've been using a pelletized lime product, and I cannot give the specifics on it because I just don't remember. But it's something that we acquired here locally. It's easy to spread. It's not near about as dusty, and we use it, but it does not. It's a more readily utilized lime, so you're using a much lower rate. You're not stockpiling it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? We're definitely over time now, but we want to make sure when you offer minerals, do you use a mix or do you offer mineral specific tubs? Let me see. What do you find for you that works best?
Okay. I'm constantly always switching up minerals, and I do not like mineral tubs. No way, no how. I know lots of people that have good success with them, but I like loose minerals, and I'm constantly swapping it up because different formulations offer different things. So we spoon feed minerals. I don't put out a 50-pound bag for 10 head. So if I have 10 head, say a group of replacement heifers, I will offer them maybe 3 pounds and see how they respond to it. And, they should be ingesting minerals at a fairly regular rate. So if they're slow to ingest a mineral, I'll go try another mineral. Anywhere from NutriBeef to cattle grazers to some of the fancier custom blends, we use a lot of different minerals. Minerals are worth more than any feed that you put in your trough. But the mineral tubs, I do not like them. And the predominant reason why I don't like them is I think that they are far too expensive for the residual benefit that you get from them. Secondly, they come in 2 types. You got cooked molasses and the hard molasses. The cooked molasses is soft and they get more of it. Whereas the hard molasses, they have to sit there and lick and lick and lick and lick and lick and lick. The same reason I don't like mineral blocks. I want the cow to be able to get a mouthful and go back to grazing. I don't want them wasting time sitting there licking. And so they sit there and lick and lick and lick. Well, that's unproductive. So you go get them the cook tub that's the softer type, and they start licking it, and the molasses is in there and they like it. And maybe they're wanting some of that protein and stuff in there. So they start biting it. And when they bite it, they pull teeth out. And Piney Woods cattle, which is all we raise, are a very long-lived breed of cattle. So when I have a 5-year-old that pulled her 2 front teeth out, now she's at 15 and she's losing a quarter of every bite that she takes in. It wasn't worth that to me. So I don't like mineral tubs. I know a lot of people, they swear by them, but I don't like them for that reason. But I do like minerals. We're actually I ordered 2 new minerals. One of them is geared toward cows that are fixing to be bred. So we're fixing to try this new brand for specific to that. And the other one is a mineral that is specifically geared to growing, developing beef animals to cater their mineral for them. So I would say if you're going to analyze and really get down nitpicky on anything, minerals is a great place to start because it is something so critical. It does everything from herd health, their immune functions, feed conversions, development. It's super critical.
Thank you. Any other question, comment? Thank you, Miss Emily. Thank you so much. Jody, Miss Emily, that's the one been asking the most questions. She said, thank you. This been great information.
You're very welcome.
Yes. Any other questions right quick? You can unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And keep in mind that this will be on the NCAT ATTRA YouTube channel eventually after we edit. So please review it. Please share it. And this is the last workshop of this soil health series. So we're very, very glad that Winston County Self-Help Association asked us to do it. We're very grateful to be able to do it and hope we can do more in the future because it's needed. We want to learn how to do our soils. We're really soil farmers. And if we get it right, we get everything else right. And so we're very glad to be able to do this series. So please go back. If this is your first evening with us, go back and check out the Soil Health 101 series. It's 3 of them. This is the 3rd. And we just appreciate everyone being here this evening. Jody, I will let you close it out. All right, he probably lost the internet. He's been out there, or the phone actually turned off, been on so long. So thanks everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you. Have a great night.